I took myself off to the cinema to see Wicked. Somewhat reluctantly.
Really? Oh, were you not a Wicked convert?
Well, I was, and I really liked it on stage. I was put off by the fact that this was part one. And I have to say that in a packed cinema, there was a groan at the end when the words "to be continued" came up. And I thought, how can you make a nearly 3-hour stage show into a nearly 6-hour movie package? That was my reservation. I just felt it would be so drawn out. But I was totally converted. I thought it was fabulous. Really, really, really enjoyed it. So I thought it should be the theme of this week's What's on Stage podcast with me, Sarah Crompton.
And me, Alex Wood.
Because it's interesting putting a very, very popular musical on film. Long history of it, obviously. But it seemed to me in some ways Wicked did some new things. And I really like the way it creates a world so convincingly.
Considering it was 20 years in the making, I genuinely don't think a better film version of Wicked could exist than what John M. Chu has overseen here. The fact that come 2025 people will be speculating about Wicked as an Oscar contender probably is blowing the pants off anyone who was originally involved in that stage production, because they never thought that this is how it would land with audiences. And like you say, if you look back at the original stage show, it didn't get glowing reviews when it was first in the West End or on Broadway, but has become this huge institution within the theatre community and now within the film community as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it obviously sets itself up. And I guess this is the other danger for the film. It sets itself up against The Wizard of Oz, which would come in most people's list of top film musicals of all time. Not in mine, actually, but there you go. And that's the danger with it. And very explicitly, it begins, as the stage show does, but it begins with the death of the Wicked Witch of the West, and consciously conjures both the aesthetic and the story of The Wizard of Oz. So it's quite audacious, I think, in how it starts. But then it goes on to completely and successfully take you into a different story, the alternate story, really, of The Wizard of Oz, where the Wicked Witch is good.
I was also sceptical about the two-parter thing.
Yeah.
Because I think we've seen in cinema a lot of the time these two-parters will essentially be a big old cash grab. And, you know, if you get audiences to come twice, they're paying twice as much to see the same story. But here it really justifies itself because there is so much more to these characters, and you need to give these characters room to breathe initially so that then what happens in Act 2 or Part 2, which is so chaotic and out there and so haphazard compared to Part 1, feels like it's been grounded in the character work that you do in the first half. I'm really, really interested to see how next Christmas we'll be talking about Wicked Part 2, because I think it's got a much harder job to do than Part 1, because it doesn't have all the fan favourite songs in it like Defying Gravity or Popular. It's got some amazing numbers because it's got, you know, No Good Deed, As Long As You're Mine, For Good. But the story around that is so much more convoluted at times. But I have faith in them now. I didn't have faith in them maybe before this film came out, but I do now.
Yes, I do. I don't know if they'll change the story, but you're right. They'll have to make it more complete, because there's no doubt with Wicked, the stage show, that you know, after Defying Gravity, it gets a bit diffuse. So they will have to find ways to make it coherent as a movie. I do have confidence now. I think I partly have confidence because I think the success of the film is partly in the design, which is completely beautiful and engrossing and other and not like anything else you've seen. And also in the performances, which are extraordinary. Cynthia Erivo is completely captivating as Elphaba. You just root for her from the moment she appears. And yeah, it's terrific. And Ariana Grande, lovely, surprisingly rich and nuanced. And Jonathan Bailey, oh my God, the minute he comes in riding on that horse, you just think, yeah, this boy's going to be a film star.
A friend and filmmaker of mine compared Grande and Erivo to Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie in Barbie, in that Ryan Gosling gets a lot of the fan love because he plays this whimsical comedic character, whereas actually what Robbie's doing is more subtle but holds the film together. And I think that's true here, in that Ariana Grande gets the larger-than-life, ditzy Glinda, but Erivo is the heart of the film, in that it all comes back to Elphaba. It is her that... She's the actor. She's actually the one that defies the wizard and sets everything in motion, when she could have just bowed to him and done as he'd asked. So that in itself is really interesting. What you're saying about the design is really fascinating to me, in that they've created so many wonderful sets. There was a joke I saw online that they couldn't use green screen because you've got a green screen performer, so there's no chance of using green screen. I think they might have used blue screen for some sections. Paul Tazewell, the costume designer, was on a bonus episode of the WhatsOnStage podcast, brilliantly eloquent, talking about the sheer attention to detail that went into every single one of these costumes. Nathan Crowley, who did the Shiz University, the Emerald City, Munchkinland, all these beautiful sets, and actually there's some slight Gaudi influences creating them for this fantastical world. And then Christopher Short's choreography. All of these incredible creative efforts are given room to breathe because of cinematographer Alice Brooks, who also did Tick Tick Boom, which we were discussing yesterday. Here, she knows that you can let these long, wide, establishing shots immerse the audiences in the world of Oz that Chew is trying to create for us, that is a very different Oz to the one that we saw in The Wizard of Oz. And as a result, your suspension of disbelief makes the musical aspects of the film feel very natural and organic and totally successful. And there are so many ways that this film could have gone so horribly wrong, and none of them appear. And I think that's the greatest triumph, is that something so ambitious is pulled off with such confidence.
Yeah.
From the fact, like even Ariana Grande being cast in the first place, someone that to many in the film world is a complete unknown. Obviously, she cut her teeth on Broadway in 13 many moons ago.
Yeah.
But this for her is career changing. And she does a Glinda that isn't a version of the one that you'd see on stage. It is something very different and actually more filmic. I'd say it sits closer to what Vivien Leigh was doing in Gone with the Wind than it does any sort of Glinda that you'd see on Broadway or in the West End.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think it does the musical the very great honour of saying, we're going to tell this story seriously. It doesn't send it up. And it has a real sense of itself, which again, actually, I think is like Barbie. So it has a similar quality to Barbie in the sense that it's telling a story that is essentially unreal, in Barbie's case about dolls, in the case of Wicked about witches. And yet the themes of both of them are very serious. So Barbie is a feminist movie. Wicked is about our treatment of the outsider and how society functions. I mean, it has that. I think that is the thing about Wicked, that it's always had this underlying seriousness which gives it power and means that it's not just, you know, a story about witches. It is more than that. So I do really respect the film, and I'll be interested to see how it does in the Oscar nominations. It's done well in the Golden Globes, but it's always a bit odd, the Golden Globes, because you have got that musical or comedy category. I hope it is recognised in the Oscars, because I think, this is a big claim, it's one of the best stage-to-screen musicals for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I think it, to be honest, almost tops Chicago as my new favourite.
Yes, well, I was going to say that, but that seems such a big claim.
Although Spielberg's West Side Story, underrated yet very impressive.
You're very fond of West Side Story. I'm less fond, but that's another conversation.
My final thought on Wicked is actually Wicked and Barbie almost have identical plots, in that there's something awry with the world and our heroine wants something fixed. So they travel to meet their benign dictator, so either the wizard or Mattel, realise that everything there is a lie, then try and usurp Mattel and the wizard, and then things diverge slightly from there. But it's interesting how they do have very similar plots. Anyway,
it's very true. It's really, really true.
We were going to segue then from talking about some of our favourite stage-to-screen adaptations beyond Wicked. Do you want to kick off with your favourite?
Well, yeah, with my favourite. Well, my third favourite. I've got one musical and two plays. And the musical is The Sound of Music, which was a successful stage show in 1959, with starring Mary Martin, but which became a mega successful movie in 1965 with Julie Andrews, and which to this day I think is one of the great screen musicals. I've liked stage adaptations of The Sound of Music. I always refer, I think, to the one at the Open Air Theatre in London, which was made use of an open air setting to be really scary. But there is nothing like as good as the film. I think in a funny way it's the same with Wicked, because the expansion actually allows you to do so much more. And again, because The Sound of Music, for all that it's about singing nuns and Austrian hills and children, is also about the rise of Hitler. And the fact that you can ground it in such reality as a movie really makes the contrast between the darkness and light in the film so powerful and so engrossing. Last Christmas, we put it on when we were having people to dinner, and we were still watching it when they arrived, because once you start watching it, you think, oh, I'll just watch Lonely Goat Herd. And then you find that you've watched it right to the end and they're walking over the mountains and escaping the Nazis. And it's such an epic, wonderful, wonderful stage transposition. I adore it.
I thought you were teeing it up earlier when you said, I have confidence. When you're talking about Wicked, I was like, oh, Sarah's foreshadowing her Sound of Music pick. It is. I only saw it for the first time probably about 4 years ago, which is horrific on my part. I hadn't seen it sooner. It is.
But you've got 50 more times to watch it.
I'll probably watch it every Christmas. I think somewhere in America they broadcast it annually on a certain channel.
It is always on at Christmas.
Yeah.
And it is always worth watching. The thing I've learned since last year when I talked about it, I think, is that one of Julie Andrews' problems with Lonely Goat Herd was she couldn't yodel. And Mary Martin had apparently done a very good yodel on stage. And Julie had real problems with her yodelling and had to practice for a very long time to get that yodel. Oh. That's my strange fact. What's your first of stage to screen? My
first pick is throwing it right back to 1951 for Elia Kazan's adaptation of Tennessee Williams's A Streetcar Named Desire with Vivien Leigh, Marlon Brando and Kim Hunter. So the first time I watched it was actually in a school classroom, either on VHS or DVD, you know, when they wheel out the TV and you put it on. I'd never seen a Tennessee Williams play on stage at that point, and I was studying A Streetcar Named Desire in school, and, you know, you do all the protracted lessons about metaphor and simile, and it all felt quite turgid until watching it live and seeing Brando wrapping his arms around Kim Hunter and doing that quintessential stellar shout, scream even, I suppose, more than a shout. It really made me realise how profoundly impressive A Streetcar Named Desire is. And then I remember later in that term, we actually convinced the teacher to let us watch the Simpsons episode where Marge Simpson stars in the musical version of A Streetcar Named Desire called Streetcar. And it was a 35-minute long lesson. And I think the episode lasted like 23 minutes. And we found it on YouTube very illegally and convinced her that that would be a good way to spend an entire lesson watching The Simpsons. And I think we came out of the watching it and I think she probably thought, why on earth did I let these kids convince me to watch The Simpsons for an entire lesson? But it's a really good Simpsons episode, actually. I'd recommend that. But no, I think it is a really one of the great films and does Williams's material complete justice. Yeah, he'd done it on stage, hadn't he, Brando? So he was taking that part over. And the mythology around that is really, really hard to escape. I was thinking that when watching the Paul Mescal version, Streetcar, which is on London stage and is about to go to New York. I think Rebecca Frecknell and Paul Mescal make a very conscious decision to escape from Brando. And the portrayal is really interesting in that sense, but it's so hard to get away from it, and it's harder to get away from him
than it is to get away from the portrayals of Stella and Blanche in a way. I think, Vivian Leigh is wonderful in that movie, but I've seen lots of people who've left her far behind. It's much, much harder to leave that Brando image behind because it was his defining performance in many, many ways. And that work with Kazan around that period in both Streetcar and On the Waterfront defined Brando as an actor, essentially.
What is your second pick?
Well, oddly, similar reasons. So my second pick is Long Day's Journey into Night, which is Sidney Lumet and which is, I think, in the early 60s they made it. And it's a similar reason to you because I realised that's the first time I ever saw a Eugene O'Neill play. I didn't know much about Eugene O'Neill, and I have a feeling I came across this film just on a Sunday afternoon or something when I was looking for something to watch. And, gloomy. So obviously I watched it. And I don't know anymore how good a representation of the play it is, but it's got an amazing cast led by Katharine Hepburn and Ralph Richardson, who's an actor I never saw on stage, and I've always regretted not seeing Richardson because, he was one of the triumvirate of great British actors with Olivier and Gielgud. And I feel sad that I never saw anything because he lived a bit longer and I should have been able to see something I didn't. And I was just transfixed by the language of it. And also by Hepburn, who plays Constance in a sort of dream state. And her voice, that very Katharine Hepburn voice, was so sing-song and poetic. And Jason Robards is in it as well. And it was the performances that I remember and that I loved, and that sense of a great play just being put in front of me. It doesn't move much from the Tyrone house. A family pulls itself apart in 3 hours in front of your eyes in a very tense way, just as it does on the stage. Lumet, who was good at tension, who directed 12 Angry Men, he just holds the camera and lets them be. Yeah, I still think it's one of the great transpositions. I don't think it's a great movie in a way, but I think it's a great way of seeing that play.
That transposition discussion is so important here because I think plays and musicals are written in a certain language and they have to be translated when they are brought to screen. And I think the greatest failure for some of the stage to screen adaptations is when they get that wrong. Like, take something like the film version of The History Boys.
Yes.
Feels almost, it loses that sense of like kinetic farce when it is brought to the screen compared to what it has on stage.
Yeah, it just gets opened out too much, doesn't it?
And there's also that conversation around, have directors lost that confidence, like you say, to just hold still, let the actors do their thing, let the words bring out the magic in the performance. And a lot of the times now you talk about how films feeling over-edited or the cuts are too rapid and stuff like that, when actually you can, especially with stage actors, they know how to hold an audience's attention for a very long period of time. And I think Long Day's Journey into Night is a clear example of that.
That is what's brilliant about Long Day's Journey. The tension stays there and the sense of disintegration is there. What's your next?
So a bit of light relief after some heavy drama.
Someone needs to do
I'm just
it.
going to go straight in on Mamma Mia. Belts and braces. Probably the first great jukebox musical transposed to the screen. Phyllida Lloyd, who directed the stage show, directs the film as well. I wouldn't say it's a directorial triumph. And actually, I'd say, controversially, the second Mamma Mia film is a lot more cinematic. And I can't remember who directed that one, but it feels a bit more like it's made for film. But you can just tell that this is a huge ensemble cast of brilliant actors who just wanted to go to a Greek island, sing some ABBA, and be high camp about it all, and it works completely. It's not a good film, but it's an amazing experience, if that makes sense.
It does. I think that's true.
And it also shows that musicals can be crowd pleasers and big commercial successes.
Yeah.
And I think that it probably did wonders for the stage show, and it's probably done wonders for the West End commercially as a result, saying, look how much fun we can have when, and we're doing this 8 times a week, so come on down and see it all in action. So yeah, that's my.
I think it's a really good choice. Again, I resisted. I am a terrible Grinch. I realise that I think, I can't just have pure joy. What's Meryl Streep doing in a musical? But when I finally watched it, I thought, God, this is such fun, and it is brilliantly done. And actually, again, keeps the setting relatively tight, but allows that sense of Greek joy and warmth and light to flood through it, which is very much in keeping with the stage show. It is terrific fun.
And then your final one for...
Well, my final one obviously is Miserable and Black and White again. When we were talking about doing this as an idea, it was the stage play on screen that first came into my mind, and it's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, directed by Mike Nichols, 1966, with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. I think is one of the greatest plays anyway, and I think in their version is astonishingly upsetting and moving and devastating, really, as a portrait of a marriage and a society and of failed lives and of aspiration and of art. I find it almost faultless. Interestingly, there's one issue with it, that in the play, they never move from the battered living room. And in the film, Mike Nichols takes a decision to take them out once. They go out to buy more booze. And I think you could possibly argue that it loses its momentum at that point. But the basic dramatic thrust is sustained by a truly unbelievable performance by Richard Burton in particular. You know, the great tragedy of Burton is he was a great actor who never quite made a great film, but I think this is it. And I think his portrayal of George, rumpled and battered and destroyed but clinging to something in himself, and his way with the words, his sense that the language matters, is wonderful. And it's matched by Taylor, who of course was the one who won the Oscar, who gives one of those great naturalistic performances that she was capable of giving. I mean, Nichols is quoted as saying that he couldn't see how she did it. He couldn't see the sort of seamlessness of her managing to become the mouthy, vulgar Martha and just being perfect in each moment. And I don't think Taylor knew how she did it, but it is one of the magnificent performances of her career. It's a terrific film. George Segal and Sandy Dennis are the young couple, and they're equally good. I just love it.
I never believed that a group of people sitting in a living room could be so profoundly devastating as an idea until I saw Albie's words in that film. It changed what I believed theatre could achieve, even in the least ambitious setting imaginable. So yeah.
It does do astonishing things as a film. It's got that moment where Martha is being rude about George, and instead of staying with her, it follows George as he walks through the house, and he eventually picks up a gun. And the look on Burton's face as he does all that, and as you follow him back into the room when he fires it, is so murderous. And again, it's that creation of tension. I think Nichols was a really amazing film director. He does this on the back of his success with The Graduate. He's having his key time as a film director, and he brings all that knowledge and all that power to making this film one of the great stage transpositions, and also, interestingly, makes it look older than it is. So I'm always fascinated by, he makes it in the late 60s, and yet he makes it look as if it's been filmed in the 40s. It's an interesting choice that he puts it black and white, and I think that's to give it gravitas and take it away from the film star glossiness of Burton and Taylor. Anyhow, your final film.
So I'm gonna
race through our favourite.
So I'm gonna go full circle and bring it back to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, but in this case, End of the Rainbow by Peter Quilter, that was adapted into the 2019 film Judy, directed by Richard Gold.
I'm overwhelmed by the brilliance of that segue, but Carry on.
Someone's like, we planned it. So yes, Renée Zellweger playing Judy Garland towards the end of her life, so pretty much the last year of her life, and then flashbacks to her time filming The Wizard of Oz and the sheer horror of the circumstances she faced whilst making that film, and the exploitation and the abuse that she suffered whilst making that film, and what it then did to her life. Utterly heartbreaking on stage when Tracy Bennett played the role. It was a damning indictment of Hollywood, really, more than anything. It's introspection as a film, saying, how can we take one of our greatest leading lights and completely destroy her life? Yeah. And then when she gets to the end, she's just trying to make ends meet through concerts in the West End that she's just utterly incapable of doing because her life has gone so far off the rails, and yet she still has that magic. And you see those moments where her charisma and her talent are allowed to rear their heads for fleeting moments, and you see why Judy Garland was such a beloved force. And there's a reason that friend of Judy is a commonly used term, because she was such a brilliant ally and friend to so many people who were feeling ostracized in the same way that Elphaba is in Wicked. So that there again another parallel. And then there's just complete tragedy because that she's going to die not long after. She has those moments in the West End. Also a brilliant performance from Michael Gambon as Delphont, the West End owner, Bernard Delphont. Fantastic film. And
it's full of good performances. Jessie Buckley as well as the assistant, and clearly full of style quality and transformative from Zellweger, who I think is a really good actress and often surprises you with how powerful she is. I can almost never bear to read or watch Judy Garland because I feel that this incredible shining talent was just so abused. I love her in Meet Me in St. Louis, which is another seasonal film everybody can watch. And she just glows as a young actress, continues to do so in amazing musicals, the Vincent Minnelli musicals, and yet was tragically abused and given the drugs that she never really escaped, drugs to wake up, drugs to go to sleep. And the more you learn about the exploitation of child stars in Hollywood in that period, the more shocking it is. And of course, that's the link with Taylor, who similarly had a past to escape, who was also badly treated, possibly was slightly saved by a more robust mother and possibly a more robust personality. But the addiction issues that dogged Taylor throughout her life are undoubtedly seeded in a childhood where you were regarded as a pack horse just to keep carrying the weight of a movie on your back. I do think Judy is an incredibly powerful telling of the end of that story and manages to conjure what it was that she had that was so special, that idea of her voice. And one of my favourite recordings is Judy Garland at Carnegie Hall, which again is done towards the last late flourishing of her career, where people take the risk to put her on a stage. And the reward is the richness and wisdom of her singing, which is just devastating. Yeah, so that's a good, though slightly for you, Alex, slightly downbeat film.
I know. What a negative ending for this Twixmas podcast. We need to go and eat some more leftovers.
Well, then maybe that's what
crack open the celebrations to get ourselves through.
And we'll be back next week being very, very upbeat with all our exciting choices for the new year.
Yes.
So that will be something to keep you going as you make your turkey curry.
Yeah, there's so much to look forward to next year. And some great films based on stage shows, I think, also in the works, like Kiss of the Spider Woman coming to the screen. Yeah. But we can talk more about that in due course in 2025,
when we'll be back with you. But for now, it's goodbye from this week's episode of the What's on Stage podcast with me, Sarah Crompton,
and me, Alex Wood. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe and leave a comment wherever you can. We're back next week.